BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Friday, another Cooper Friday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Fridays, I talk to you guys about D.B. Cooper, the man responsible for the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. aviation history. And in this episode, I will be revisiting Ted Braden as a D.B. Cooper suspect, looking at the book Paratrooper of Fortune, as well as The Skies Belong to Us, and of course continuing with the Cooper Profile segment, which is all about the psychological profiling of skyjackers. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about D.B. Cooper. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. Firstly, I would like to say that I hope everyone had a wonderful time at CooperCon to those who attended, and I look forward to hearing all the stories and all the posts and all of the new information that has been shared about D.B. Cooper, the case, and the developments, and it's reported that a new person of interest has been released. But there is a D.B. Cooper suspect in POI out there named Ted B. Braden, whom I think is one of the most interesting D.B. Cooper suspects. And I did one episode about him previously on BBOR, but it was very short. And I've always wanted to do a follow-up because I wanted to look at some of the ideas that were in the book Paratrooper of Fortune that's written by Drew Beeson. Ted Braden is someone who lived an extraordinary life. He lived a very exciting and dangerous life, and he was also an expert in skydiving. Some people insist that he was D.B. Cooper. Some people insist that he's the man that boarded the plane going from Portland to Seattle, and other people think that those who are accusing Ted Braden are simply off by just a little, and that even though he might be a compelling suspect, they think that he is the wrong guy. So let's find out. Now, firstly, in the book Paratrooper of Fortune, there is a subtitle that this is the story of Ted B. Braden, and if you do choose to read this book, you will see that it's not arranged purely as a D.B. Cooper book. It really is about telling the story of Ted Braden and looking at all the different things that he did. There's a dedication that's given to the MACVSA group, that's the Military Assistance Command Studies and Observations group. And I also want to just get to a lot of the major points about why people think Ted Braden could have been D.B. Cooper and why people think that Ted Braden may not have been D.B. Cooper. The first is, as you just heard, he was a commando. He was somebody who worked in special forces, and he was a skydiver who was the best of the best. He was an expert skydiver. He was an expert jumper. He could have easily pulled off the D.B. Cooper skyjacking, and Ted Braden was also a specialist in halo jumping, high altitude, low opening, because when D.B. Cooper was on the plane, firstly, he jumped at night. Secondly, he jumped into clouds and inclement weather. It was raining, cold temperatures, but as Ryan Burns of the D.B. Cooper Sleuth Channel points out, they weren't inhumanely cold. It's not like he would have died within 5 minutes or something like that, but they were rough conditions all the same. And Ted Braden could have easily handled this. Things like rain and inclement weather wouldn't have been a major problem for him because he was a specialist in high altitude, low opening jumps, and he could even perhaps get much closer to the ground than some of the other D.B. Cooper suspects who may have been hindered by things like the inclement weather in the air at 10,000 feet from when D.B. Cooper jumped. One of the early things that is discussed, though, in Drew Beeson's book, Paratrooper of Fortune, is he's telling the story of the Unsolved Mysteries episode that came out in 1988. And the Unsolved Mysteries episode really is one that I think has shared the D.B. Cooper story perhaps more than anything else. When I talk to people in the Vortex and say, hey, when did you first find out about D.B. Cooper? A lot of them say that it was from the Unsolved Mysteries episode. And this is the one that revealed D.B. Cooper Composite C. Composite C was drawn from the memories of Florence Schaffner. She was the flight attendant who first received the note from D.B. Cooper when he hands it to her and says, "Miss, you better take a look at that note again. I have a bomb." That was to Florence Schaffner. And Drew Beeson even talks about this in the beginning, saying that the one that has been immortalized is Composite A, the Bing Crosby sketch. And it's the one that perhaps people are most familiar with. But then there's Composite B, the Cary Grant sketch, and Composite C from Florence Schaffner, which looks a lot like Ted B. Braden. And I think that Drew has been very careful to select a particular image for the front of his book that does resemble Composite A, showing Cooper more from the side. Now, somebody wrote this out in the comment section once on Cooper Friday, talking about a different flight attendant's observations, and that was Tina Mucklow, and saying that if Tina Mucklow reportedly was next to Cooper for hours upon hours, why aren't there side composites that are just shared with everything, like from the side view? We have the full frontal view that we see in the Bing sketch, the Cary Grant sketch, the Dracula sketch, Composite C, and the Wavy Gravy sketch. Why not just have side composites shared? Because those are the ones that should be the most accurate. I think that's an excellent observation. I'm not sure why those aren't shared and distributed as readily as some of these. But the whole point is, even though at first it might seem like Ted Braden doesn't match the composite sketches, it really does seem like he perhaps does indeed. So in terms of some of the material that is in the book Paratrooper of Fortune, there is a challenge question that has been posted here. And you guys on Black Box Online Radio know that I can't resist challenge questions. And this says, could any of the other D.B. Cooper suspects be the dastardly daredevil who calmly asked for $200,000 and then just as calmly jumped from a perfectly good commercial jetliner? Well, with most of them, the answer is no. Just because somebody had a military background does not mean that they were the type of person to jump from a plane, and also to have the ability to stay calm throughout the duration of the flight, because somebody like Richard McCoy, who's another D.B. Cooper suspect and committed his own skyjacking in 1972, was a Green Beret. He had all the military training. He had all of the abilities to do this, and he was a giant nervous wreck. He was a sweating mess when he was on the plane in 1972, and he was just eating candy nonstop. That was his particular vice. D.B. Cooper drank 1 glass of bourbon with 7-Up, and he also smoked 7 cigarettes. But one thing that doesn't necessarily seem to be done by Cooper is he's not showing that he's doing this out of nervousness. He may have been doing it to calm his nerves, but some people think that Cooper may have been doing this as part of a type of James Bond complex, or he's just trying to create the image that he is someone who is just cool, calm, and collected. But Cooper was mostly composed. No matter what he was thinking, Cooper was composed. And could the majority of these D.B. Cooper suspects been able to do that? No, I don't think so. So I will give Drew Beeson credit for that one. And I've told you guys before about that channel, The Trading Post, that's run by Fred and Noodle. And when he did his D.B. Cooper video, he took a different stance than what a lot of other YouTubers do. Most of them say, no, I think this guy was a Boeing engineer or something like that. And I brought up numerous examples over the past several months on Cooper Friday. And Fred was just like, this guy Cooper, he seems like he was ex-military, but not just any kind of military. This guy seems like ex-Black Ops or Special Forces for the way that he's able to stay in control throughout the entire duration of the skyjacking, as well as just being flawless with the parachute putting it on. And Ted Braden would have been the man to do that. And there's also a segment here in the book Paratrooper of Fortune where it states that Ted Braden was literally the real Rambo. Learning more about Ted Braden, his special forces and commando experience, his mercenary work, his CIA involvement, and the strong speculation that he may just be the infamous skyjacker D.B. Cooper left me on a sometimes difficult but fascinating and rewarding journey to unravel the mystery. And that's the beginning of Paratrooper of Fortune. And when it says mercenary, that mostly means like a professional soldier. But in terms of Ted Braden's background, he was somebody who joined the military at age 16. He went into World War II, and he led an on and again, off again career with the military. And he was also somebody who worked with the CIA. So he was perhaps doing stuff that was a lot more dangerous than what Cooper was dealing with, and he had the ability to stay composed. And if anything, this could be something that is relevant to Cooper's mental state. He could be dealing with something like psychopathy, sociopathy, narcissism, antisocial personality disorder. It's one thing that's been highly discussed. I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but I do tend to think from time to time that Ted Braden was somebody who was dealing with any sort of combination of psychological factors that I just listed off: psychopathy, narcissism, antisocial personality disorder, something of that sort. And I'll just look at a very small portion of Drew Beeson's book here, Paratrooper of Fortune. The story of Ted B. Braden, master parachutist and soldier of fortune, trained by Uncle Sam in the art of war, but not in the art of peace, is the quintessential American story, the story of men from his generation and of war that defined the generation. And there really is some truth to that, because when you look at the actions and activities of Ted Braden, yes, he's going to fight in World War II. He joins the Army at age 16, but then he is ultimately going to become a private soldier, more or less. He's somebody who could handle these very violent situations and these very life-threatening situations. And another note that is in here in the book Paratrooper of Fortune is that Ted Braden joined the military when he was 16 years old, but he lied and claimed that he was 18 years old. He enlisted in the Army and went to Fort Campbell, Kentucky for basic training, and he joined the 101 1st Airborne Division that was known as the Screaming Eagles. And if you look at this book, Paratrooper of Fortune, one of the most valuable things, I think, is all the photos that Drew Beeson has shared. He has filled this book with images of Ted Braden throughout various times of his life, and some of them resemble D.B. Cooper. But I told you guys that I would get to the major points against Ted Braden being D.B. Cooper, and to those of you who have followed the Cooper case, perhaps you will all know what is going to happen. You all know what I'm going to say. People don't challenge Ted Braden on his ability to commit the skyjacking. People don't challenge Ted Braden on his knowledge of parachutes. He was one of the best in the world. People don't challenge Ted Braden on his background. They challenge him on his physical appearance. And they say things to the effect of, Ted Braden may have been too short to have been D.B. Cooper. And I have to give a shout out to Jack123, who was asking me a question about the book The Skies Belong to Us, as well as Ted Braden. And he said, wasn't Ted Braden only 5 feet 8 inches tall? And if I recall, I'm going to share everything. Ted Braden was listed as 5 feet 9 from his military records, but also, over time as he got older, his height went down. And I have to give a shout out to Nikki B as well, who sent me the prison document that showed that Ted Braden's height was once listed as 5 feet 6 inches tall. So that's like when you get older, there's the curvature of the spine and so on. And on a recent episode of D.B. Cooper Sleuth, Ryan Burns was talking about how things like this should not be discredited or downplayed, or people should not think lightly of them, because the flight attendant that sat next to D.B. Cooper for the longest time was Tina Mucklow, and she was 5 feet 8 inches tall. If this guy were 5'9", wouldn't she just say something like, oh yeah, he was about an inch taller than me? If he were 5'8", wouldn't she just say, well yeah, he was about as tall as me? But it seemed like she was interacting with a man who was considerably taller than her. Those are just some of the things that have been brought up recently, because in this episode, I want to talk about Ted Braden, I want to talk about the points for, and I want to talk about the points against. And I can even ask you guys that as a challenge question. Maybe your D.B. Cooper suspect is Ted Braden. Do you think that Ted Braden was too short to have been D.B. Cooper? And of course, the other biggest challenge is that some people say that Ted Braden had a nose that was too big. And, I have to side with Drew Beeson on this one. Ted Braden's nose only looks extremely large from a certain angle. When you look at other photos of Ted Braden, his nose looks somewhat smaller in comparison to the D.B. Cooper sketches. Ted Braden, though, had an enormous career in the military, and to continue with some issues from his World War II service, he shipped out to Europe on October 10th of 1944, arriving there on October 20th, and he missed out on the D-Day invasion, but he saw plenty of fighting during the war, and he even participated in the Battle of the Bulge. So I think that's, gotta support the World War II veterans. But it seems like with Ted Braden, the military was going to be something that was very challenging for him, and was also going to be something that was going to be very, very traumatic in some ways, because it's going to affect his mental state throughout the duration of his life, and it perhaps led him down a life of crime. And, some people deal with post-traumatic stress disorder, but he also may have just dealt with exposures to high-risk situations, adrenaline-based situations, and have taken a liking to it. And you guys know just as well, some people do have those experiences in the military, and some people will even go as far as saying that the war consumes people. But Drew has also shared some things in the book Paratrooper of Fortune about how Ted Braden was mentioned in Skydiver magazine in the 1960s. He competed in the Scottish Championships for skydiving, and it was featured in 1962 and 63. And, he's featured in the European Stars and Stripes. All of this stuff is absolutely fascinating, and that is one of the things that really did surprise me about the D.B. Cooper case, just about how much we're going to be encountering the worlds of aviation. And it's not only just like knowledge and details about airplanes, but as we see here about skydiving championships. But Ted Braden also participated in something called Project Delta. In 1965, Braden arrived in Vietnam, where he was recruited to help with Project Delta, and as explained in an October 1967 Ramparts magazine article, Project Delta was formed by the Special Forces in May of 1964 to infiltrate teams into Laos. Later, it took on a hunter-killer team aspect, 6 to 8 man teams penetrating the NLF, also known as the Viet Cong guerrilla movement, supported by the North Vietnamese Army. And this will really show that Ted Braden is somebody who was experiencing a lot of military experience, World War II veteran, Vietnam veteran, and this is where he would encounter the halo technique. Project Delta's mission utilized the halo technique to rescue prisoners. The halo technique enabled aircrafts to fly above the range of the surface of air missiles and minimize the parachutist's exposure to flak. So then, high altitude, low opening, they fly high above, the paratrooper jumps down, opens the parachute close to the ground, and there is a lower risk of being shot down. So yes, this guy could have done it. And one of the things that Drew Beeson always comes back to when he's talking about Ted Braden's candidacy for being D.B. Cooper, or the likelihood that Ted Braden was D.B. Cooper, is guys from the MACV thought that was Ted Braden. Once they learned about Ted Braden, and once they learned about D.B. Cooper, they immediately connected it to the story of Ted Braden. They're like, yeah, that sounds like Ted Braden. And that's ultimately where we are today, because I think that Ted Braden definitely could have pulled this off with ease, maybe more so than any other suspect. But the question that we have to explore is, did he actually do it? And I'll just look at one final section here from the book Paratrooper of Fortune, and it talks about the concept of extraction. Although the SOG teams were highly adept at getting in and out of enemy territory without detection, they were not always successful, because the NVA used spotters and trackers to locate them. Each SOG member had his own code name in the field, and Ted Braden was aptly named Touchdown. Touchdown Ted. It is unclear how Ted got his name, but in the words of Jim Hetrick, my code name was Raven. RT Colorado teammate JD Bass was Tub. I don't know why Ted was Touchdown, but it could be that he chose it himself. Well, Touchdown, it seems like that would either be a football reference or a skydiving reference. Overall, what do you think about Ted B. Braden as a D.B. Cooper suspect? Do you think that D.B. Cooper was one of the best skydivers in the world? Do you think that's why D.B. Cooper was never caught? Do you think that's why D.B. Cooper pulled this off, and we don't truly know the identity of D.B. Cooper, because he was an elite member of a military unit who decided to go rogue? Or maybe he had an ulterior motive? Because one thing that I've explored here on Cooper Friday is that there is the CIA angle. that the CIA set up D.B. Cooper as a psyop, or it was a way to get more airplane security measures put in place. And is that a conspiracy theory? Yes, absolutely. I'm not even going to lie to you. That is a conspiracy theory, but sometimes conspiracies are true. And the two people that would be suitable for a job like that would be Ted Braden and E. Howard Hunt. But one more time, the book is Paratrooper of Fortune by Drew Beeson, the story of Ted B. Braden, and it is just filled with excellent images of Ted Braden's military service and tells a lot of stories of the World War II and Vietnam eras and a lot of other good stuff there. But I told you guys that I would discuss the book, The Skies Belong to Us, and this is one that was mentioned by Jack123 in the comment, and it didn't talk about the book by name, but it did also bring up a certain individual named Catherine Kirkow. And what Jack was saying is that wasn't Catherine Kirkow also a skyjacker who got away, a skyjacker who didn't get caught? D.B. Cooper is referred to as the only unsolved skyjacking in commercial aviation history, but with Catherine Kirkow, she was a female skyjacker who was never apprehended. And somebody else recommended this book to me, and I looked at it once and did a little preview, and I was, just reading some things. Catherine Kirkow was referred to as the hippie skyjacker. But yes, it appears that she was never actually captured. She was identified, like people know what happened, they know who did it, and they know what was going on, but it appears that she was never identified. To provide some background information on this book, The Skies Belong to Us, it is called Love and Terror in the Golden Age of Hijacking. And I don't like that phraseology at all. I really don't, because love and terror in the golden age of hijacking, sometimes people will talk about the golden age of criminal behavior, and they even do this with serial killers. They will say that there was a golden age of serial killers in the 1970s, 80s, and maybe 90s, and I'm just thinking, no, there wasn't. This is not a golden age. This is a time when people were trying to pay attention to certain types of criminals, and the media was reporting on them in certain ways, people were studying them in certain ways, and that's it. Like, literally, that's it. There is no golden age. I find that is way too much of a glorification and way too much of a romanticization. But with the golden age of skyjacking, as this person has called it, and the author's name is Brendan Kerner, is that it's 1961 to 1973. That is when skyjackings were very frequent, and they were happening because there were holes in the American aviation system. There were holes in airport and airplane security that have mostly since been either closed or people have certain preventative measures, like the whole concept of you go through security before you get on an airplane, right? D.B. Cooper got on the plane. He gave a false name. He said his name was Dan Cooper, right? Which was mostly an alias. And he gets on the plane with a bomb. He sits wherever he wants, gets the back row, and he's saying that he wants parachutes and $200,000, fly me to Mexico. All right, there were some massive holes in the aviation system. There were some massive holes in the security associated with airplanes, absolutely. And D.B. Cooper wasn't the only person who took advantage of this. There were, of course, some countless other skyjackers, which I talked to you guys about in the Cooper Profile segment. But there was about one skyjacking per week, and there were about 160 incidents, and most skyjackers went to Cuba. This is all from the book The Skies That Belong to Us. And there were two skyjackers that did a very long-distance skyjacking named Willie Holder and Catherine Kirkow. Again, Catherine Kirkow is referred to as the hippie skyjacker. And in this case, I think it's very important to note that this is a male-female team. I'm not trying to put anybody down, but it does seem like skyjacking is primarily a male-led operation, and there are a few psychological reasons for that. But even in the book The Skyjacker by Dr. David G. Hubbard, he really goes into a lot of detail about how it's usually the man's idea, and even if he has a female accomplice, she is going along with it because the man is involved. But ultimately, they took control of Western Airlines Flight 701 on June 2nd, 1972, and ended up flying it across the Atlantic Ocean to Algeria. It finally examines what happens with the hijacking craze and how it came to an end in 1973. One more time, that book is called The Skies Belong to Us. But what's really interesting is they mentioned that the male in this one, the male participant, Willie Roger Holder, was captured, but Catherine Kirkhow still has her whereabouts unknown. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that she was successful. That means that she has not been found. I mean, who knows what happened to her at that point? And I would really like to get through some more of these FBI statements and look at some more of the FBI files in regards to this. Maybe I can do a follow-up in a future episode of Black Box Online Radio's Cooper Friday. But ultimately, do you have any comments about this? And I just think that she may have gotten away, but everybody knows that she did it. And it appears that this one was done as somewhat of a form of a protest, but it also seems like they were doing it because of their own selfishness, and this is how a lot of these skyjackers come about. There really is a self-serving motivation that has been developed. And one more time, though, if you'd like to hear more about any of these stories, you can tune in every Friday for an episode about D.B. Cooper. And you guys know about hitting the like button and subscribing. Really helps out the channel, YouTube algorithm, and all of that. I also release other shows here on Black Box Online Radio, such as one about the Zodiac Killer, the disappearance of Maura Murray, Jack the Ripper, the Black Dahlia, and, of course, Cooper Friday. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com. buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday. And as far as this week's Cooper Profile segment goes, this is when I talk to you guys about the psychological profiling of skyjackers, mostly looking at the writings of Dr. David G. Hubbard, who wrote 2 books on the subject, The Skyjacker and Winning Back the Sky. In this week's Cooper Profile segment, we'll focus on the concept of failure. And I think that there's a really interesting commonality that isn't even directly discussed in the book. It's just something that I happen to notice. And think about what I said in regards to this Catherine Kirkhow skyjacking, about how most skyjackers are men, and then the woman is pulled in as an accomplice, or there's a man facilitating the majority of the skyjacking, and she is aiding and abetting. Well, there is one outlier to a lot of these skyjacking commonalities. There's almost an exception that proves the rule with a lot of things associated with skyjackers. I've told you before that right now in the book, in the chapter that I'm exploring, there's a sample of 16. We've been through 16 different stories of skyjackers so far here on the Cooper Profile segment, and only one of them was a female. Not Catherine Kirkhow, a different female skyjacker. Her name was Gladys. But one was not male. Okay, so that's the outlier, right? Here's some new stuff. Out of all the skyjackers that were studied and interviewed by Dr. David G. Hubbard, 15 of them were not well off. Only one of them was financially successful. And the exact phraseology that is used in the book is that only one skyjacker had a reasonable level of financial success. Reasonably successful. That's what's put in the book. And this is a guy named Ted. Not Ted Mayfield, but that would be interesting. But his name is Ted, and he was a businessman, an entrepreneur. He had his own business. 15 out of 16 of these skyjackers were people who were not well off. They did not have a good economic situation. And we're talking about things like being unemployed, being fired recently, or some of them were even criminals that were on the run, but they didn't have access to large amounts of money. So, when you look at a skyjacker like D.B. Cooper, who's on a plane, and he's not saying stuff like, I will only let go of the bomb if you release the hostages. No, he's not doing this for a political protest. He's not getting on the plane and saying, take me to Cuba so I can kill Fidel Castro. No, this isn't a political assassination. He's on the plane and he says, give me $200,000. Do you think that there's a chance that that's where Cooper fell in on the economic spectrum? That he's not rich? I mean, maybe he was poor. Maybe he experienced some new financial stressors in his life, and I can totally see that. But one other commonality that is discussed among these skyjackers is they have problems with their father. Remember last week on the Cooper Profile when I was saying that almost all of them have had a falling out with their father, or their father is deceased, he's dead, he has abandoned the family, or maybe he's just living in squalor. He's just an alcoholic who's drinking away his life and waiting for death. So that seems to be the much more pressing issue that's going on. But the economic thing should not be downplayed. This is the Cooper Profile segment. We want to know, what was Cooper experiencing? What was Cooper thinking? What was Cooper's personality like? And also, what was his economic and financial situation like? Okay, so Cooper could have been, someone who was a little bit poor, but not completely poor, right? Now, some of the other interesting commonalities is that 15 out of 16 of the Skyjackers had no purpose in life. They had no purpose. Only one of them said that when he woke up in the morning, he felt like he was doing something meaningful. Only one of them said that when he woke up in the morning, he felt like he had a place to be and people depended on him, and it was all worthwhile. And that wasn't Ted the businessman, it was a different Skyjacker named Sam. But I was really looking at this chart that was created by Dr. David G. Hubbard, and I could see that, hey, it's almost like 15 out of 16 Skyjackers often fall into the same categories, and there's usually one outlier. What does that mean? There is an exception that proves the rule. So, why would somebody be experiencing this stuff? Think about what I said. Fired, unemployed, criminal on the run, somebody who is not doing very well off. And I've had Pat Boland as a guest here on Cooper Friday in the past, and we had the opportunity to talk about the D.B. Cooper suspect, Milton Vordahl, and she said that, Milton Vordahl seems like somebody who could have earned the $200,000 by legal means. He could have earned it in a different way. He didn't have to skyjack an airplane and ask for $200,000. James Klansnick was another suspect that I talked about on a previous Cooper Friday a couple weeks ago. And, he also was an aerospace engineer. I don't want to misstate anything, but, okay, he works in engineering. He would have been somebody who perhaps could have earned the money legally as well. So I don't necessarily think that those would be the types that we're looking for. And I think that this, if anything, this goes to show that you're dealing with somebody who very specifically is dealing with financial hardship, and they may have had a bad relationship with their father. Another point that was discussed in the most recent chapter of the Skyjacker was that a frequent ideation that is experienced by Skyjackers is murderous ideation in regards to their father. Now, that doesn't mean that they actually want to kill their father. A lot of their fathers are already dead, and they weren't murdered. But they do have these types of murderous thoughts. And when I say ideation, it literally just means the ideas coming to mind. It's not like they have actual thoughts of killing their father. It just comes to their mind for a split second. And that's the way that I've gathered from reading the book. So, animosity toward the father. Well, why would they have animosity toward the father? Because their fathers tried to control them, and they sided with their mother. And then, by spending more time with mother, becoming closer to the mother, having a personality like their mother's, the father rejected them and thought that they were not good. So then this person is developing some type of animosity toward their father, and from time to time, they imagine killing him, and ultimately, they were left with a very strong dissatisfaction in life, and they blamed their father for it. But this was a really interesting note that I made from the book The Skyjacker. In the most recent chapter, once they commit the skyjacking, they abandon it. Once they commit the skyjacking, those feelings of animosity toward their father are really let go. And I think it's really interesting that David G. Hubbard, the author of this book, wanted to interview skyjackers to do some groundbreaking profiling research, because by interviewing him, they get to tell him the conscious motivation. And really, most of the skyjackers, again, 15 out of 16 are saying it was about escape. Well, why did you commit a skyjacking? I wanted to get away from my life. So money is involved. With somebody like D.B. Cooper, absolutely money is involved. D.B. Cooper could have said anything. He had the bomb. He had the plane. He could have gone anywhere, but he wanted the money. And this really goes to show that, yes, money is involved, but what's the primary motivation? They wanted to escape from their life. So, waking up in the morning with no purpose. There's a very high chance that that's what D.B. Cooper was feeling. Oh, it doesn't matter what I do. My life's terrible. My father ruined me. What's the plan? So what's the plan? Get on the airplane, ask for a large amount of money, jump out into the night, and then who knows? It doesn't even matter what happens after that because he is reborn. And for the rest of his life, he will always be a skyjacker. And I think that these are some really interesting observations, and it's really giving us a lot of insight as to how D.B. Cooper may have functioned. With somebody like Ted B. Braden, who is the suspect of today's episode for the early segment, you can really see how Ted Braden may have been pulled into this world. He may have been somebody who felt like he had no purpose, because there's a new podcast that's going to be coming out next year that's going to talk a lot about Ted Braden, and Drew Beeson is going to be associated with that, I think, and Tim Wallace, who's also been a guest on this program in the past, will be associated with that. And what's the major issue? Ted Braden couldn't stop doing this stuff. He would do things like stealing a truck and driving it up and down the East Coast. He would be doing things like the mercenary killings and ends up working in the Congo. He is going to be doing things that are criminal. Seems like maybe he couldn't get out of these things, and that doesn't necessarily mean that he was destitute or that he was somebody who had no opportunities, but maybe he didn't feel that guiding direction of purpose. So I think that this book, The Skyjacker, is really something that took me a while to warm up to, because when I first read it, it really just kind of hit me like a freight train. And I do mean that because when I was younger, I had a lot of problems reading. I'm shocked that I talked to you guys about true crime books, because when I was a kid, I couldn't read anything. I couldn't focus on anything. But when I would look at a book that had pictures, a book with maps, or maybe the comic books, or anything with pictures, magazines, right? I could focus on those much more easily. And you can move from one different subject to the next. Oh, hey, look, here is a cool picture. Here's another cool picture. Here's another cool picture. And the pictures have captions on them, right? Or the comic books have the panels, and you can remember the stuff. Hey, here's a little fact. Here's a little fact. Here's a little fact. But when you actually have to sit down and read a school book, it just doesn't happen. I'm like, I don't get it. Like, I literally couldn't focus on my school books. But, I went to, through high school, I went to college, I graduated, and I went to grad school for my master's degree. And I developed a method in grad school that stayed with me for years. I used it for about 3 or 4 years. And that would be that they ask you to write a paper. They give you a challenge question. And they say, okay, you're going to write a paper about this subject. So I would take the book, and I would skim read the chapter. Like I said, jumping all around. Okay, I'm just looking for something that catches my attention. I would decide how I'm going to respond to the challenge question. I'm going to decide the way I'm going to argue the point. And then I would read the chapter a second time, a little bit more closely, but only focusing on the supporting points for my argument. This is my idea, and these are the points that back it up. And that worked. It worked for years, about 3 or 4 years of grad school. I really thought that I was going to get my master's in 1 year. It took 5.5, but such is life. And then I got to my final class. It was the last class that I did for my master's degree, economic history. And that time, the professor didn't give us the task. It was just read the book, write a paper. And I'm like, well, what do you mean read the book, write the paper about what specifically? And the guidelines that we had were like, what is the author saying? What is his thesis statement? How do you respond to it? What are the supporting evidence? What were the historical consequences of that? She didn't just directly tell us the task that we're supposed to do, write a paper about this. And my method did not work, because that was a time when I had to read the book all the way through. And eventually, I made it. Eventually, I did it. Maybe not my best, but it was a very eye-opening experience. And in case you're wondering, that professor was an absolute jerk. This wasn't some good experience. That was a bad experience, because I'm like, wait a second, can I ask for a little bit more help, a little bit more clarity? No, I don't know what to tell you. Get away from me. You're bothering me. Bye. More or less, that's how the conversations would go down. But with the book The Skyjacker, I wanted to try just to read it like that. All right, I'm going to be using this on Black Box Online Radio. I'm going to be flipping through the book The Skyjacker, and oh, hey, here's an interesting idea. Here's an interesting idea. I'm going to talk about this on Cooper Friday. Absolutely not. No. I realized I couldn't do that. And that's when I decided that, hey, this Cooper profile segment, it's going to be something very different. I'm going to be going through like 2 pages a week with you guys because this is a book that has to be read in order. It's almost as if every sentence builds upon the preceding sentence. And I wish you guys could see my copy of the Skyjacker with all of my notes and highlighters and my dog-eared pages. And it is something where I had to make the decision that I can't just jump around and talk about it. I can't just decide what my argument is going to be and find the supporting points, because everything is put together in a certain way, and it's a very slow process. And you don't really have the liberty of doing that when your teacher tells you, okay, you have a report that's due tomorrow, or your professor says by November 4th you have a deadline. You can't spend 8 months reading one book and going through it at your own pace. But that's what things like Black Box Online Radio are for. We get to talk about ideas. And I've just wanted to point out that some books have to be analyzed in different ways. Some people respond to information in different ways. Some people analyze the facts in different ways. And I think, though, that even though it's taking me an enormous amount of time to read this book, it really is the premier book in the world of psychological profiling in relation to skyjackers. And I think that there are so many valuable things that I've gathered along the way and that I've been able to share with you here on Cooper Friday. And let's not make any light of this concept of the outlier. Let's not make any light of this concept of how somebody may have started out by wanting to achieve in life, and then they believe that their parents were holding them back. Their father let them down. Their personalities, like their mother, they don't feel strong. They end up as a failure in their own mind. Maybe they're not a failure. Lots of working class people go to work every day and they don't skyjack airplanes, right? They don't commit robberies. They don't hold up banks. Lots of working class people just do it. They deal with the grind. This is somebody who didn't want to deal with the grind. Now, why would this person want to deal with the grind? Maybe because he thought he was hopeless. He thought, my life didn't turn out the way I wanted. I blame my father. What am I going to do? I'm going to skyjack an airplane. I have no other reason to get up in the morning. The majority of skyjackers say they're doing it to escape that feeling. So is that where D.B. Cooper is? Maybe a man who is either working class or on the lower side of middle class, somebody who believes that he should have been a greater achiever, somebody who believes that he deserved more in life, somebody who may have had a falling out with his family, with his children. He has no strong personal connections. Maybe somebody who was either unemployed for a long stretch or was recently fired from a job. Now, if he had been unemployed for a long stretch, that would explain a separation with his family members. The wife leaves him, takes the kids, day before Thanksgiving, he's all alone, and he wants the money back. It's not really about going to make his life better. It's not going to make his life better. He really just wants to escape from it all. What do you think? Put your ideas in the comments section down below. You guys know where to write the show, blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook name is Ned DeHaan, and there is also the Black Box Online Radio Facebook page, and BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram. And I use these pages to release shorts and reels Monday through Friday, mostly talking about serial killers, true crime news, but anything under the sun or in the darkness is fair game. You can download this show for free on Spotify and Apple Podcasts under the names Black Box Podcast or Black Box True Crime. And, of course, there is also the True Crime Designs page. The images that you see going by on the screen are archived at True Crime Designs on Facebook. True Crime Designs, please follow. You know about the buymeacoffee.com page, BlackBoxNed88. And that will be all for me now. Everybody have a wonderful weekend, and until next time.